Professor Harber also published many books, including some books about China and civilization. His main focus is economy and business. Now, let's welcome Professor Harber to give us his ideas about the China-Israel collaboration and also especially the relationship between China, Israel, and the US. Professor Harber.
Thank you, Benjamin. Shalom to everyone. Ni hao. In Paris, where I am speaking of, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. So good morning to those who want to share my early start this morning. I will talk about this triangular relationship between Israel, China, and America. But of course, you are aware that such triangle, there are hundreds. Every country in the world has to decide what to do with, contemplating this US-China confrontation, how to mitigate the impact on its own country, how to manage, how to avoid to choose a camp, because most countries would like to work with both powers. And but the example of Israel is extremely interesting because it's a small country. It has a very special connection with America, as you all know, but it has developed also a very special relationship with China for 1,000 years. And so there is a history between Israel and China, and that makes Israel's position very sensitive, very complicated, and probably a symbol of what most countries in the world have to decide for themselves. Let me start with the basis of the triangle, the US-China confrontation. It's been going on for some time already, some years, so we know what it is about, and it's time to make a little bit of assessment, and I will do it through 5 features, 5 points. The first one is to say that it is a long-term confrontation. Actually, it's been going on already for 13 years, because I put the beginning of the confrontation in the year 2008. What happened in 2008? 2 very important events. One was the worst economic crisis which hit the Western capitalist system for a long time, since 1929, people say. And that, of course, crisis weakened the Western camp, showed the weakness of the dominating civilization in the world, the Western civilization. And at the same time, in Beijing, where were held the Olympic Games. And I would like you to remember the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics. It was a fantastic show telling about the history of China, about the history of the civilization of China, with a central figure, which was Confucius. And I remember well, the man who was in charge of supervising the opening ceremony was the vice president of China. And in 2008, the vice president of China was Xi Jinping. So this 2000 year was a year where the shift of power, a kind of weakening West and booming China was obvious to all eyes. And the second feature was that China was very concerned about telling the world that it had a civilization of its own, and it wanted to promote that civilization, and that civilization was going to be important. And we are going to see that in the next features. So it's a long story already. And if you look at the 3 American presidents, Obama, Trump, Biden, they all took the same direction, using the same words against China. So we know now that it is not a fancy of one man. It is a strongly entrenched strategic policy of America to confront China. And so it will last. It will last few more years, maybe few more decades. And in my view, that confrontation will be the backbone of the world geopolitics for the whole 21st century. And in a way, we can say that the 21st century started in 2008. The second feature is to address the question, why? Why is this confrontation? What are the roots? Here, we have a mainstream agreement, which I will tell you about, but which I would like to challenge. The mainstream agreement is that this confrontation is a traditional big power confrontation. It has two sides. One is it refers to a Greek historian 2,500 years ago, Thucydides, who defined the fact that when you have a rising power meeting a declining power, both power have to get into confrontation. And we have found in our history many examples of such meeting of declining and climbing powers, like World War I or even World War II. And so we would be in a similar situation with US and China. The other side of that big power confrontation is to say that America, which was the hegemon, the only power in the world, at least for 20 years, from 1990 to 2010, America was alone. America has decided that they no longer want to be the only power in the world, but they don't want another one to be the number one. And they don't want China to be the one, and they say, we don't want China because China is communist, aggressive, and looking for world domination. That's the idea behind the confrontation as it was started actually by the American. I want to challenge this by adding another dimension, which I mentioned in feature number 1, which is a civilization dimension. You all know Samuel Huntington and his famous article and book, which is called Clash of Civilization. It well may be that this confrontation between America and China is one of the first real clash of civilization of modern times. And if it is like this, and we are going to see if it is like this, it's because values of both sides are different. There is a gap in values, and there is a big scope for misunderstanding of each other. Especially from the American side, who don't take too much time to study other civilization because they believe that their civilization is the best and the only one. I think China has made a lot of efforts to study the Western civilization, but there is an imbalance in mutual understanding, and that's creating, in my view, a clash of civilization. And the third feature is when you look at the weapons which are used for this confrontation. And you can see that America has been using two types of wars against China. The first one was an economic war, which is a very traditional way for America to fight adversaries. They refrain from attacking militarily, but they like to do economic war. This was the case in the Second War with Japan. First, there was a very strong embargo for oil going to Japan before the war, and actually Japan started the war. So economic war, which has three components: a trading war, with taxes, 25% put on most Chinese exports to America, an investment war, preventing China to buy any strategic asset in the West, and a tech war, preventing Chinese big tech company, and of course the example is Huawei, from accessing to American market and other markets, and also preventing Huawei to get supplies, specific components and semiconductors and other things from the West. So that's three elements of an economic war. What we can say about this economic war, that it is not working very effectively. I don't think the Chinese economy is hit by the war. I think it has many feedbacks against America itself, and it's punishing the whole world. So I think this economic war may not go further, but then America started another war. It's a war on values. I call it the diplomacy of values, which is blaming China behavior based on Western criteria of good behavior, democracy, human rights, rule of law, and saying that these Western values are universal, and if China does not follow them, then we have to blame China. And the ultimate objective of that value war, of that diplomacy of value, is to delegitimize China, is to break the good image of China. And we in Israel, we know about it because we have been the subject of similar attacks on the legitimacy of Israel, on the behavior of Israel. So we know exactly what Chinese feel about it. And so the last proof of it is this diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics. It's another sign of trying to hit China image with some result. I must say that today, when you look at the world, the image of China, which was pretty good until a few years ago, has been damaged a lot if you look at all the polls everywhere. So it's an issue, and it has been a success, if I may say, of this diplomacy of value. The fourth feature is to ask ourselves, is there a limit to the confrontation? Or can it go, can it escalate with no limit? There is a limit. And the good news was this phone call between Xi Jinping and Biden, 210 minutes of video conversation, leading to two conclusions. One, there will be no hot war between the two countries, even around the Taiwanese issue, no hot war, not even a cold war. Because everybody knows that the Cold War between America and the West and the Soviet Union lasted 40 years, and nobody wants this confrontation to last so long. So this is fences which has been put by both leaders, which, by the way, looked very relaxed because both were having success domestically. Xi Jinping with the meeting of the party, which was very positive for next year, and Biden, who could get money from the Congress to rehabilitate America. So we had both leaders which really tried to put fences to their confrontation. So it's a relief to know that there will be no escalation. Hopefully. And so the last question, the last feature is, when will the confrontation end? And, if it is a clash of civilization, as I feel it is, and I hope I have shown few aspects proving that it is a civilization clash, there is no limit of time because nobody is going to back down. If you look at the Cold War, it only ended because one party lost. Soviet Union lost. In the case of Russia, of America and China, there is no hope that any party will lose. We are dealing with two major powers, and we are dealing with the two most resilient people in the world. So nobody is going to back down. And so there will be no end, except two cases. One is when each player will calculate that the damage of confrontation is higher than a compromise, or, and this is something which I hope and which introduced me to my second part of my presentation, Israel, if third countries like Israel, like Europe, like Japan, like many other countries, try to talk to both parties and say, stop the confrontation because it's punishing the whole world, added to the pandemic, added to climate change. There is no hope that world can be prosperous if you keep fighting. So there is an incentive for most of the countries to try to put an end. So let's go back to the Israel position. What can Israel do? Israel has been doing two things successively. Until recently, Israel has done what everybody is doing, and which has a name: navigating, trying to not to choose, trying to give something to America, something to China, trying to navigate through the rough seas so that Israel can keep working with America and with China. You know, for Israel today, it's very important to reconnect with America. For the last 12 years, it's been very difficult between Israel and America because of Trump too close to Bibi, and before that, Obama too opposite to Bibi. So there was two very sensitive issue. Today, Israel has to reconciliate with Biden, and so they have to give a lot of efforts to show to America they are doing a lot of efforts in the direction of America. But at the same time, Israel wants to keep on the long term a good relationship with China. So we see most countries do not want to choose. Only two countries today have chosen: Great Britain and Australia, by joining America in a kind of partnership in the South China Seas, making some Navy drills together. It's called AUKUS. Australia, UK, US. So these two countries have chosen a camp, but in case of most other countries, nobody has chosen. And now we are shifting Israel position to a new position, which is stop navigating and start negotiating. In other words, Israel has to start talking with each party and trying to explain and give solid arguments why Israel wants to continue to work with both and why it is acceptable to both. And talking to China, Israel has one argument, which is let's work together in innovation, and we are going to cover that in the next roundtable. Let's work in innovation in all fields except military, because America has drawn red lines that Israel cannot go over, which is don't sell technology which has a military use or could have a military use. That's the red line. Outside of this, you can do everything. So China smartly has understood it. And whatever we do together today, Israel and China, is limited to civilian technology, civilian innovations. And so that's something that we can negotiate with China. With America, it's more complicated to explain to America that we don't want to be pressured to cut ties with China. And so we have a few arguments, and this will be almost my conclusion. And the most important argument is the Middle East. In the Middle East, you have a completely new setup today. One is Israel has signed the Abraham Accord, which means agreements with Arab countries, showing that the first time since the birth of Israel, since 1948, Israel is able to have a peaceful agreement, developing business, developing even high technology cooperation with some Arab countries, and that Abraham Accords have to be enlarged to Saudi Arabia, more to Egypt, going to Morocco, etc., etc. But the other factor is that China now is very much involved in the Middle East. China has signed a lot of agreements, long-term strategic partnership agreements with many countries in the Middle East, with Iran, but also with Saudi Arabia, with the Emirates, with Egypt. So China is a partner of everyone. And so the idea for Israel is to try to explain to America that the interest of America is to let Israel develop cooperation with the Arab world, Sunni world, against Iran, and also to have China on its side. If America pushes too much Israel to cut ties with China, then China has no other option than to get closer to Iran. So this is something which the diplomats of Israel, which are among the smartest diplomats in the world, have to develop in the future. And this will be leaving the navigating policy to a negotiation policy. I want to conclude by saying that at the end of the day, everybody hopes that there will be the end of the US-China confrontation. And sometimes I wonder if Israel, with its own culture, Judaism, could be a proper go-between between the two parties with an ability to understand both civilizations. And I'm very anxious and hopeful to listen to the other roundtable of today, where rabbis are going to explain Judaism and rabbis are going to speak with Chinese experts and cultural experts to see if we can find a way by understanding both culture to have a kind of cultural or civilization compromise or modus vivendi, a way of life where two different cultures can live together. And I hope that Israel can be, also it's a small country and it's not easy to do, can be one of the factors which bring the end of this US-China confrontation, which is going to punish the whole world and risking less prosperity and more danger for peace. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Harber. I can't